Grüße, meine Damen und Herren, der Messerabe hier, zurück mit einem weiteren Video. Und im heutigen Video werde ich mir ein weiteres Messer von Otter Messer ansehen, nämlich das Ankermesser. Yes, salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and I'm sure I just butchered all of that. But today we will be taking a look at yet another German knife, and that knife is the Ankermesser. Now, the Ankermesser is a knife with a very interesting and somewhat enigmatic history, and no one really knows where it originated. Some say it was originally a German knife, others the British sailor's knife, the British sheepfoot, that later became the clasp knife for the British Army and Navy. Others, however, are of the impression that it was originally the French armor, or elamar. I believe, again, more butchering of pronunciation we have here. Another variation being the London, which is another French knife. But regardless of where this knife originated, it is a rather iconic pattern. Now, first and foremost, of course, it comes with the typical otter box here. This knife is also mislabeled. It says Sapelli, when the actual handle material here is grenadilla, or African blackwood. Within, we of course have the wax paper that it is wrapped in, and the cleaning cloth. So, there you are. Now, this is the large variety of the Ankermesser. There's also a smaller variation available, which is, I believe, almost identical in dimension to the Webermesser here. But this is the large variety, and it's a very substantial knife. So first and foremost, the thing about this that's probably the most noteworthy is this large brass anchor in the center of the handle, and I must say, the handle is absolutely beautiful on this knife. The wood is, of course, grenadilla, or African blackwood, much akin to the handle on the dry Messer, which you can see features a similar style with the carbon bolsters, blackwood handles, and brass embossing. So, more comparisons with that later, but in the meantime, you have this polished brass anchor to complement your brass pins, and everything is sanded to perfection. You can't feel any of these transitions here. They are that well done. Again, the anchor is cut out, the shape, and then the actual piece itself is placed inside. They knock it down with a hammer and eventually sand and polish it like the rest of the handle. And again, they did a perfect job, absolutely seamless. But it's a very classic anchor. They also offer it with a stainless steel anchor. That is available on the smoked oak and sapelli wood variety, or varieties of this knife. Sapelli, just as an example, is the material featured on the weaver's knife, or Webermesser. But the wood has a beautiful grain on this knife. It's also very, very well polished. And all it takes really is just a drop of mineral oil and it looks lovely. Has a nice delicate sheen to it. Far closer to the gloss finish rather than matte. Note the hole for the lanyard, which is not included with this knife, but you can purchase these with a lanyard already included. Well done. Very cleanly drilled out. So, opening up the knife and having a look at the blade, This does have a nail nick, clearly, but it's very much a pinchable knife. The action on this is extremely snappy. Not uncomfortable by any means, but you can see we have a C75 carbon steel sheepfoot, or rather ramfoot, blade. And automatically this is a very formidable knife. And I mean that in the sense that this is built like a tank. This knife is extremely sturdy, easy forefinger grip on it. It's relatively large. I'll give you a measurement here. You're looking at 7¼ inches overall, with a blade of 3¼ and a cutting edge of just over 2¾ So again, as I always say, I wouldn't recommend this exactly as a carry in the UK due to the conflicting laws and how, depending, it could be 3 inches overall blade or 3 inches cutting edge. So I would say be careful if you decide to carry this, as if you were to get stopped by a constable, well, depending on the constable, you could either be carrying a perfectly legal knife or one worthy of a trip to the police station. So keep that in mind. I would much rather recommend the smaller variety of the Anker knife, which is sharing the dimensions of the Webermesser. And so you can see this would certainly fall under the UK legal requirements and would thus be a more reliable, safe knife to carry. But as for the Ankermesser Groß, this is, again, a large knife. You can see overall has a decently thick handle. I don't usually measure handle thickness, but it's about, what is that, 10/16 of an inch, thereabout. You can see that the bolsters are relatively wide, as well as the handles. Makes for a very comfortable, reliable grip in the hand. The blade is satin finished, and you can already see it's accumulating a very subtle patina. I've carried this knife a decent bit, not as much as the Mercator Kupfer Klein, but a decent bit. You can already see a little bit of a patina starting to form. C75 carbon steel is, I've heard, the European equivalent of 1075, so it's a more than adequate carbon steel, easy to sharpen, takes a very fine edge. I find that the Messer, which is probably my most used otter knife and one of my most used knives overall, is very, very easy to sharpen and takes a very nice edge. You can see this knife has a much more advanced patina, as it has been used a fair bit. Also disregard the sheen from the oil, which I just use as a preventative to deter rust. So the fit and finish on this knife is something to behold. Again, aside from having perfect transitions on the handle scales, the back is very clean. Again, you have steel liners and a steel spring. And it may appear to have a little bit of minimal gapping. Holding it up to the light, there are some very subtle, slight gaps here, but nothing too major. The transitions from the bolsters to the handles are seamless, or almost seamless in this case. It's a very, very slight bit of catch you can get here, but again, nothing significant. The bolsters feature a brushed finish, and in this case are carbon steel, which means that they will patina alongside the blade, which can give you a bit of a look like this. The dry and eaten messer having a carbon blade with its patina, and the bolsters, which have also accumulated a nice darker gray hue. And that will just happen from natural use and the oils from your hand. Brief comparison before I continue. The two knives are similar in size. The dry and eaten messer is a bit longer overall, but you can see that in terms of the blades, the Ankermesser is significantly wider, despite being almost the same in terms of overall length. The spear point profile, of course, grants the dry and eaten messer a little bit of extra reach. But these are, again, very akin, and with the matching handles and brass accents, these knives could very much be part of a set. There is no blade play on this whatsoever in any direction. Very, very solid. The spring, again, I can't stress this enough. This has a very strong action. I wouldn't call it uncomfortable. To me, this is perfectly within the realm of acceptable, but you can hear it has a very nice thwack when opening. The closure is a little less impressive, but granted, you don't really want a gator snap on the closure anyway, in case you happen to have your finger in the way. But you can hear it's a decent snapshot, but nothing ridiculous. Centering is pretty much perfect, which I believe is akin to the dry and eaten messer, which you can see is also right down the middle. Again, the nail nick is well ground, but you can pinch the knife with ease. No half stop on this knife, just a very positive snap when opening. You have your little etched otter logo and your stamp of Solingen, Germany. Again, if you ever wonder whether your otter knife is stainless or carbon, if it says Solingen, Germany, it's usually carbon, but if it says Rostfrei Solingen or Rostfrei Germany, you probably have a stainless knife. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Ramsfoot profile. I generally prefer a slimmer blade like a Lamfoot, or alternatively, something with a better, more noticeable point like the Wharncliffe. And again, this isn't even the pointiest of Wharncliffes, but I can certainly see the use in a blade like this. It feels incredibly robust, the knife as a whole, but this blade could be an absolute workhorse in my eyes. And again, considering the stock of the blade is relatively thick, but it tapers down to a very, very fine, thin edge, this would be an excellent work knife. And that's what these were originally made to do. The sailor's knife, as it's often referred to as, whether from Germany, France, or the UK, often sported a sheepfoot or ramfoot style blade for the very reason that it doesn't have a particularly sharp or aggressive point. And while yes, you could still use this theoretically for some piercing work, it's not going to be nearly as efficient at such a task as, say, a spear point or a clip point. And the reason for this, apparently, was due to the simple fact that if you're going to give all of your sailors a knife to use, it would be best to cut down on any accidental or intentional injuries dealt with these. And you can imagine if sailors were to get into a fight, they could still use something like this. Anything with an edge can be theoretically dangerous, but not nearly as much as, say, a dagger. And also, if you are, say, cutting rope, I heard this from Patty's Potato Peelers, a wonderful channel that I'm sure all of you are well acquainted with. When he was discussing this knife, he explained that when the ship would lurch, say if you were cutting some rope with a knife like this, if you were to lurch with the waves, it would be a little less likely that you'd stab your Adam's apple with the point. So overall, the Sheepfoot or Ramfoot profile was intended to cut down on any injuries that could occur while living the seafaring life. So there's that, and also the fact it's a very utilitarian blade shape that offers a lot of just general material for a lot of sharpening and more sharpening, which would mean you could get a lot of use in on one of these. But again, it is a tank of a knife. I also forgot to mention there is a stop pin, but you can see the blade is quite far away from the interior of the knife, so you won't get any blade wrap on this. I walk most of my knives shut out of habit, but you can absolutely snap this closed and there is no blade wrap whatsoever. But again, great knife with a great snap. I'd say this is probably a 7.5 or an 8, whereas the dry Ankermesser would definitely be probably a 4.5 or a 5, maybe a 6. But both of these knives are very well made. I'd say that this knife, which I believe was made sooner than this model here, I would say that the fit and finish on the Ankermesser is a little bit better. And in that case, by all means, that's something worth celebrating. As a company, gradually increasing its quality control is always something worth celebrating. And otherwise, I just got lucky and happened to get a particularly good one. But this knife is incredibly well made. Everything is smoothly sanded and polished. It's extremely sharp out of the box. And again, it's been through a little bit of light use, but you can see that this is not going to work on camera, I'm assuming. Very much sharp enough to be user-ready out of the box, and is just generally a well-made knife. And I've already said that quite a bit, but I'm incredibly impressed with this. And it's not a piece I would have seen myself liking all that much. It's got a blade shape that I'm not too fond of, and it's a larger model, whereas I would have probably preferred a smaller variety, but again, this was a gift, and I'm incredibly taken with it. So this is an excellent knife. I believe they have these at moonraker.co.uk, which is where I'd say you can get otter knives for some of the best prices. I think this was sitting at around £60 last I saw. 55, 60, somewhere around there. So very inexpensive for what it is. African blackwood handles, brass anchor, carbon blade, excellent fit and finish, a strong but not uncomfortable back spring tension, possible lanyard, and a traditional German knife that has been made for well over 100 years, and a design that has been made for well over 100 years in a variety of countries. So it's a sailor's knife, and a very good example of one. I'm very taken with this piece. I think it looks lovely, it feels lovely in the hand, and is just immensely utilitarian, while still remaining very pretty, even so. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the Otter Messer Ankermesser Groß, or large anchor knife, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.